Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on his way to Uganda. It's the first leg of his tour of 4 East African countries. Now, it's the first time that a sitting Israeli Prime Minister has visited Africa since Yitzhak Rabin went to Morocco back in 1994. Netanyahu's trip is aimed at strengthening Israel's cooperation with African countries, but his first engagement is a personal one, commemorating the death of his brother. Our Fidelis Emba takes a look.
Yonathan Netanyahu, the younger brother of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin, was killed at the Entebbe airport in Uganda 40 years ago. It was while leading a raid to free passengers aboard a hijacked Air France plane. The Prime Minister is expected to hold bilateral talks with President Yoweri Museveni after the program. Netanyahu will also be visiting Kenya, Rwanda and Ethiopia to deepen economic ties with the continent, which presently constitutes only 2% of Israel's foreign policy. Israel's struggle with thousands of African migrants will also be up for discussion.
We're responsible enough and in this country long enough, and we are an integral part of Israeli society. Here everybody is racist. Judges are racist, the state is racist. We've had enough.
From the time of the previous demonstration up until now, nothing has changed. Same thing. If something had changed, if the government had taken care of it, we wouldn't have gone out again. But now here we are again. The government should deal with it immediately.
The Israeli Prime Minister is expected to talk about the return of migrants to their home countries.
It's just not fair. They are just like us. They serve in the army and do whatever it takes. They have been living here for 20 years and never caused any problem.
And as Al-Shabaab continues to pose a serious threat to peace in the region, the East African countries will try and convince Netanyahu for Israel's support in their war against terrorism. Fidelis Emba, TLT World.
Well, for more on this, Fidelis Emba joins us live in the studio. Fidelis, this is a very interesting connection which you actually pointed out in your news story. Tell us a little bit more about Operation Entebbe.
Well, some Palestinians and Germans hijacked an Air France plane, which was carrying over 100 Israelis. And they diverted the plane to Entebbe in Uganda. And so the Israelis had to send a military men to actually go after these hijackers. They came, and the commando operation was carried out by the Israeli forces, led by the younger brother of Benjamin Netanyahu. So during that operation, he was killed, and he was the only Israeli that was killed. The hijackers were killed, and about 20 Ugandan soldiers and civilians were also killed.
So over 100 Israeli or
hostages were, but the hostages, about 100 Israeli hostages were actually freed by the commandos. And
like you pointed out, he was the only member of Israel's defense forces, the special forces, to have been killed in an operation.
Yes, and he was the leader of the operation, and he died during that. So it's actually beyond the fact that for the Israelis, he's been honored a couple of times posthumously, but for Benjamin Netanyahu, it's a personal thing, because this is the very first time he's going to where his brother was being killed.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're seeing an interest. Benjamin Netanyahu is on a 4-day nation tour of East Africa. Why are we seeing Israel all of a sudden increase its interest in this part of the world?
Well, for Israel, Africa is increasingly becoming strategic for Israel, to Israel for two reasons. One, diplomacy, because they need Africa's diplomatic support, at the UN, especially because of, the case about their continued occupation of the Gaza Strip and their dealings with Palestinians. So they need that African vote. And now what they're trying to do is offer services, offer some kind of support, increase their relations with African countries so that when it gets to the UN and they need their support, they will easily vote for them. And then on the other hand, the dynamics is gradually changing, the economic dynamics in Africa. You have Turkey now making inroads to Africa. You have India making inroads. You have China taking, like a chunk of, the African trade. Unlike before, where you had the old order of having Britain, US, and Israel. So Israel is now trying to see what they can get out of it. And with increasing extremism, especially across Nigeria, Somalia, and even Uganda, and some other African countries where Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and Al-Qaeda is actually having having a sort of a field day. So Israel defense technology is needed, and these African countries would gradually, more like wholeheartedly welcome the Israeli defense system so that they will be able to tackle this extremism across the continent.
All right, Fidelis, we thank you very much for that analysis.